Did you know there is a demon so powerful, so terrifying, that even the devil himself fears it? According to ancient texts, this entity was not born in hell, but was cast out long before Lucifer's rebellion. It is said to dwell in the shadows of existence, beyond even the lake of fire, a force so destructive that demons dare not speak its name. Some believe that before the end of days, this demon will rise, not to serve hell, but to consume it. Legends say that when Christ returns, the devil will be imprisoned for 1,000 years, but even he will not be the final enemy. The true terror lurks in the abyss, waiting for its moment. Some call it Abaddon, the angel of the abyss, a destroyer said to command an army of locusts, bringing chaos and torment to the world. Some believe Abaddon is more than just a demon, something ancient, a force of destruction that even the devil himself dreads. Locked away by God, too dangerous for even hell to contain, leading a terror greater than anything the world has ever seen.
There exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of so-called enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. The outcome of this secret destiny is a world order ruled by a supernatural king, powerful, the Antichrist. This king was descended of a divine race. That is, he belonged to the order of the illumined. For those who come to a state of wisdom, then belong to a family of hero perfected human being. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed. That was a quote by Manly P. Hall, The Secret Destiny of the World. And I'm honored to have with me this evening one of my really good friends and most excellent researcher, investigator, Gary Wayne. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am, and so happy to be back with you again. It's been a while, and I just love some of the discussions we get into, and thinking tonight might be more of the same. So glad to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a while, man, and I'm really glad to be able to share time and space and conversation and catch up. I know there's been a lot happening. We were trying to get together for the conference, the End Time Mysteries Conference here in Atlanta, but all of this crazy COVID, Corona, and economic crisis and shutdowns and all of that's been going on. So, but before we get into it, if you would, Gary, just tell people your website, your books, and the ones that you're working on now, where they can go to contact you, and all of that information.
Sure, happy to do that. So probably the best place to get a hold of me is at my website, which is the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6 conspiracy.com. And on there, I've got an email. And for people who do want to get a hold of me on the email, you can get a hold of me at genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. So just remember the website and then put gmail.com on. And you can ask me any questions that you want, or ask for a document or whatever. And on the website, I also have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy book. And there's also links to buy a signed copy there, and over to Kindle version for digital, or Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So lots of ways to get a hold of the book, and get a hold of me is on the website. Also, I'm on Facebook still. I was looking at some other sites, but they seem to be coming down. So, and other ones I'm not too sure about. So, still on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I am hooked up to Twitter, but I haven't used it in a while. That was one of the sites I was trying to move away from, but I'm still on Twitter, and we'll see where we go with that. So, but definitely on a search to add a few more social sites. But any of the ones I've kind of signed up on and put some work on, is just not much activity there, and some of them aren't as secure and free of foreign influence that I would have liked. So still looking.
Yeah, well, one of our good friends, Sean Griffith, he works with Kingdom in Context, and they are working on putting together a platform called Lighthouse, which should be released shortly. And from what we understand, it's like a YouTube, Facebook, Etsy, and marketplace and video, audio, all that all together.
The key, though, is to be able to ensure you have a server, because Amazon and Google basically control the servers, right? So, and that's what happened to Parler.
True that.
So if you don't have a server, then there's going to be issues. But I would hope that there would be a lot of people that would be starting to look at, say, hey, look, here's the market size that they're trying to shut down, and we're going to start up our own server platforms and allow all of these other social media sites that want to go to a place where you can have free speech and not be afraid of whatever the political correctness word of the day is, which is hard to keep up with because they make it up as they go. So yeah, hopefully that happens.
Yeah, and I agree with you that this is something to start investigating because of the serious, as far as the condemnation and also the censorship. It's crazy, but this is the world we live in, so got to deal with it and try to adapt.
Yeah, and I was listening earlier today on the Tucker Carlson show, and he had the owner of Twitter on there, and he's basically saying, hey, this is just the beginning, and if people think that it's going to be over right away, it's not. They're just getting started. So hard to know how far they're going to go, but they seem to be marching in wedlock with the mainstream media and with one major party that's all on the left side that is seemingly giving them what they're trying to do is have absolute control. They want to have sort of this veneer of democracy, but it's really totalitarianism. So they're recreating the Chinese and the Russian model here.
Yeah. I mean, we are really at the Brave New World, 1984. All the world's a stage, and control, manipulation, and orchestration, problem, reaction, solution. It's all in our face, and all the people that used to make fun of alternative truth thinkers and seekers, call us conspiracy theorists. I mean, even they now realize something's not right with what's going on.
Yeah, that's a word I've been hearing a lot in the last 6 months, that even people just say something's not right about it. I'm going, come on, shake your head. Like, what you need to open your eyes. You need to start asking some hard questions. It's more than something's not right. Something big is going on, and it's coming fast. It's unbelievable how it's ramped up with the open door ability that COVID has brought around, and they were able to test what they could do on human rights with the COVID aspect, and now they're just going to broaden it. So, I mean, you can expect to see that they are going to do shutdowns over anything that they declare apocalyptic, but in the meantime, they're going to shut down anybody who disagrees with them. So, we'll see where this goes, and how far they can push, and what the pushback is going to be. What I'm afraid of, though, is that typically you would say, let's wait for the next election and get out there and vote. But I think we've got pretty good understanding that the voting situation is not as secure as it ought to be, and
Right.
and the outcome is basically determined in the evening when they shut down key locations and decide how many votes they need. So
Yes, exactly.
it's hard to know what the pushback can do on this. And I'm not saying not to push back. I'm just saying we're in uncharted waters in terms of what our generation is used to seeing, and in uncharted waters with all the other things that go on in the world in terms of the technology that's around today, the way the world works today, the march for globalism today, and a global nationalism that they're trying to overlay onto the world. So we're in a situation where it's hard to know, and I'm a real prophecy buff, so I watch these things like a hawk, but I
Right.
have to admit, I mean, it's been quite surprising in terms of what has happened and how it has happened. Directionally,
Right.
it's going where I thought it would go, but not
Oh, so
how,
fast.
and so fast, and that
So fast,
the
right?
the extraordinary left, in terms of how far left, when I say extraordinary, has control of all of the major corporations. They have control of the banks. They have control of the oil companies now. They have control of the energy industry. They have control of the media. They have control of the universities. They have control of the judges. They are everywhere, and
Yes.
it's hard to know how long, or how even possible it is, how far we can push them back. But I think if we get out there and role model and are visible in the role model in numbers, that we're going to at least show that this is not going to be done easily, and we're not going to go away quietly in the night unless they've got total sort of Gestapo police out there and shutting everything down and taking people off sort of one at a time. But it's quite concerning when I'm hearing the media talking about how they're going to be able to deprogram anybody who doesn't think like them. And they're talking about camps. They're talking about all sorts of horrible things. And again, I mean, I don't want to get people too concerned, but this is what happens in the end time. So we may not be in that last 7 years yet, but this is the seeds of what grows into that monster.
Right. Yeah. Which is why I wanted to open with that particular quote. And it also leads into the work and the topic that you wanted to cover this evening with regard to Mount Hermon and, the fall of the angels and how all that really set up the mystery schools and the secret societies, and was the origin for all of what we are now contending with, because these agendas have been groomed, orchestrated over thousands of years. And people don't realize that, the whole theme of even what's on the currency with the eye at the top of the Illuminati pyramid, the Masonic inspired, the glyphs and mottos, Novus Ordo Seclorum and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a spiritual war.
Yeah, everything that is theirs, they have taciturn symbolism and iconology that reflects it, and or
Right.
written names. Everything they do is hidden in plain sight because they think most people aren't smart enough to understand it, and that only
Right.
the adepts will understand their allegories and their imagery, and that they think they're so narcissistic that they think they're so powerful that they can do anything that they want to do. So yeah,
Right.
do they control the money? Sure, they control the money. They put their symbolism on it. Do they
Right.
control the banks? I mean, all the banks, I mean, a little bit different in the modern buildings today, but they used to be all done in that sort of Greek architecture, right? Just as the temples of Greece, and or the round domes of some of the other countries, and you have that in all the government buildings, you have that in all the universities, you have that in all the courthouses. They put their imagery in there so that they make their claim, and they know people aren't going to challenge that. But there's a difference, though, being able to have the power to do that and do the power that they're trying to move on today is quite a bit different. And what they're trying to do today is they're trying to bring things back to the Atlantis of the Atlantean antediluvian period, in how they would look at things from a polytheist window. And that would have 10 kings over world government, right? That's in partnership with this mystical religion. So
Right.
they're trying to bring it back to what they would call their Eden. And they'll use that imagery of Eden, if you listen closely, that they want to bring it back to or create a new Eden, a new Atlantis. And this all begat, as you talked about, 6,000 years ago on Mount Hermon. And on Mount Hermon, they swore an oath, the fallen angels I'm talking about. We're not 100% sure that the angels were created there or whether all of them were created there. We only know the oath was created there. But certainly in some of their Gospels, in the Gnostic Gospels, they would talk about Sodom and Gomorrah as being areas which are very close by as to where they planted the seeds of the giant, both
Right.
before and after the flood. So, it doesn't really matter if the 200 first created them all on Mount Hermon, or that's just where they swore the oath. The important thing is they swore an oath of mutual imprecations. And if you look at secret societies and mystery schools and mystical religions, they are initiatory, ritualistic, allegorical, secret organizations, and you have to swear an oath in those organizations. So
Right.
if people start to understand want to know what they're talking about when they talk about as above, so below, the people who are swearing oaths in these organizations are carrying out the government, the religion, and the organizational structure of the prince of this world, Satan, and his fallen angels, who make up the pantheon of gods that they worship. And it all starts with that oath. And they usurp everything and they pull it in. It's like the secret societies in modern times, they pull in, and probably had a lot to do with, because they controlled the elite, the nobility, and the educated at the time of the translation of the King James Version Bible. But the secret societies use that Bible to swear their oaths upon. I mean, it's
Right.
just, and they use that in courts to make you swear an oath to tell the truth. And yet, in the Christian perspective, we're told that we ought not to swear an oath, that if we do,
Right.
we ought to be very careful, because we're going to be held accountable for those things, and that we should not just let our word be our word and do as what we say we're going to do, and not swear to it, because you're going to be held accountable for it. But, this is where it all begins, is on Mount Hermon, before the flood, and they create these Nephilim in the generation of Jared and Noah, depending on whether or not you're reading the Bible or First Enoch. Both time frames are accurate, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. But they created these giants who usurped the kingships around the world, and they partnered with the Queen of Heaven, the mystical religion, to control those empires. And these are the bloodlines that set up the whole nobility, the complete nobility, both before the flood and then again after the flood. They do the same thing, is made up of their extended families. So it's all of the bloodlines. And they established this feudal system both before and after the flood, where you have the mundane humans who are the servitude class. And some of them may rise up to a small merchant class that was held right through to the last few hundred years, except for what's happened in the West. And now they're trying to reel that back. They don't want to raise up the standard of living with everybody around the world. They want to lower the standard of living so that everybody's equal, a very small merchant class, and then you have the the bloodline and the wannabe bloodline elites that are going to control all of the businesses of the world, all the governance of the world. So this whole thing is starting to come full circle and in line to what you're talking about. And so when we look at Mount Hermon, we need to understand that Mount Hermon is probably the most famous polytheist and holy site in the world. And there was all of these temples that were set up through history, whether or not it was Roman temples or the Pan Temple, or there's just numerous temples that were set up there. And it's a place where Jesus went to talk about and preach at, and basically, I think, announce to the gates of Hades, the rock of the gods, that he was about to change everything, that their battle was going to be lost. They just didn't know how they were going to lose because they didn't anticipate the crucifixion. And as Corinthians says, if they did, they wouldn't have crucified him. But what's going on here today is then if we're going into the end time, and it's going to be like the days of Noah, which is an overarching sign that follows the fig tree generation, which is an overarching sign of the signs of the end time that Jesus gave to the disciples in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and Luke 17 and 21. It's going to be more than just being godless. It's going to be more than just some violence. It's going to be all the days of Noah, which is exactly the words that were used by Jesus, which were used and recorded in Hebrew, one recorded in Greek, one recorded in Hebrew in Genesis 9:29, where all the days of Noah were 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. So we need to understand what happened if we're going to understand what's going to take place in the end time. And what's important about understanding that Mount Hermon played a big role both before and after the flood, and I think the Baalim and the gods of Baal, the plural, the Baalim, which are talked about in several different sort of countries and nations around the Middle East after the flood, I think that's the council of gods that take over after the flood. And if there was a second incursion, like I think, then those ones were replaced like the antediluvian ones were, and they were all put into the abyss. And so you have other angels that would have taken over, and that council is still there with Satan at the head. And today you would expect that Mount Hermon's going to come into play if it's that important to them. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk a little bit about Mount Hermon tonight. So the first thing you kind of notice is that, you know, Mount Hermon is located on the 33rd degree latitude parallel, which is obviously a number of the secret societies, as in the Scottish Rite of the 33 degrees of Freemasonry. And then there's a UN operation on Mount Hermon that most people aren't all that aware of. And this is where it starts to get, I think, a little bit interesting. And it's called the UNDOF, which is an acronym. It's UNDOF for the commission. And it's 75 kilometers long, and it's 10 kilometers wide. And it's the largest manned UN operation in the world. Wow. And that is at, yeah. And so that is at 33.243 through where their Hermon Hotel runs through. And they've got 14 deployment positions there. And this oversees the Golan Heights, or actually rolls into the Golan Heights, which is the most strategic place within that area of the Middle East. And who controls the Golan Heights controls whether or not Israel survives or not. And the Golan Heights is where Gilgal Raphaim is located, the Wheel of the Giants. And it's known by a few other names, like, Wheel of the Spirits. And there's some Arabic names that are used for it as well. And this is an ancient holy site that, is kind of almost like that picture of Atlantis that you see on the internet. But it's sort of in a circular sort of rings in it. And it's thought to have had like over 100 dolmens. And a dolmen's a portal. DOLMEN, if people want to Google it. And this is the place in the Ugaritic texts that are talked about, which I know you're very familiar with, is where the Rephaim and thought to be the same sort of transliteration word for the Rephaim and Baal operated out of, and King Og operated out of. And what's interesting about that with these portals is that in Ezekiel 39, you have the travelers, or the passengers, as some people might call it in other translations. And that's the Hebrew word abar, which means to travel across or pass over. And the Rephaim are thought to have gone back and forth between the underworld and this world through these portals on a regular basis. And Ezekiel 39 has these travelers in there, and I would have thought that that battle would be a little bit south of there, but makes you wonder whether or not that Ezekiel 38 and 39 war might actually be fought there or not. And because you have the allegory of the sacrifice of the bulls of Bashan on in that battle, and Bashan is in the Mount Hermon region, the same region that Og ruled from. Right. And the bulls are part of that bull cult allegory, and or the angels and or the kings that were known as the bulls back then. So I think we're going to see Mount Hermon come back into play in the end time as we get closer to the end time, as we get closer to the resurgence of polytheism with the universal religion and the mystery religion that's coming, that we would call Babylon. That's described in Revelation 17 in the New Testament, and described as Babylon and other allegories within all throughout the Old Testament. So I think we need to be ready for this taking over and ever increasing presence of what's going on at one of the most volatile intersections in the whole world for the cause of war.
Hold on, Gary. We'll be right back, everyone.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
land. And the sons of the angels of God looked upon the daughters of men and found them fair, and took of them wives, and their sons became of old great men of renown. So they have been mixing with us on a genetic level since the time of Enoch and Ezekiel's will.
Here on Earth, we're intrigued by the sun, moon, and stars, and imagine there's got to be planets like ours. So conceive of a face on the surface of Mars, so in need of a meaning and purpose we lost. And indeed, they believe that these might be our gods, or that maybe with time we'll do right and evolve, and eventually reach what they seek, and then solve all the problems of man. But they really don't know that they fall, and the works of our hands are but just filthy rags. So we travel the lands to dig up our past time, our lapses, and with it are much of the facts. Some imagine that God's came in alien class and reacted.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Before we return to the subject area, I wanted to ask you, I know that you have been working on a different book and a different project. Any as far as publication timing, or any other projects or any other books that you've also decided to begin or are working on, just to kind of catch us up? It's been a little bit.
Sure. So yes, I am working on a second book. I've got a third book that I'm working through my head and mind, but I ran into a stumbling block on the first book, or I mean, the book that I'm working on right now, and I kind of just said, this approach is just not right. So I threw it out, and I started over again on it, and I want to make it more. I want to make it less like the Gen 6, even though there's some intersections on there. And I want to make it more designed for the Christian audience. And it's about the Holy Covenant and lost Israel, Israel awakening, and the second Exodus. And so I'm making some good progress on it again. I feel much more comfortable in the direction. I think this book needs to be targeted directly at Christians, because, again, as we get closer to the end time, people are going to need to understand the various aspects and sort of prophecy narratives, so that we don't get things confused as we get closer to the end time. So, and I do think we're in the fig tree generation. So, and if people were thinking earlier that when I said I don't think we're in the end time yet, I'm talking about the last 7 years when I say that. So, but I do think we're in the fig tree generation.
Yeah, well, I definitely concur, without a doubt, in my opinion. Since the blooming of the fig tree, with the recreation of the nation state of Israel, things have accelerated so fast and so quickly, as far as the fallen angel technology, and they even recognizing Christ as their tormentor and judge. They asked him, "Have you come to torment us before the time?" And so they know that there's a time as well. And I believe that the blooming of the fig tree was an indication to them that they have to step it up and they have to move quickly. And certainly It seems like things have progressed rapidly since then.
Very rapidly since World War II didn't exactly work out, which I think is sort of an archetype of the end time. And I might touch on that a little bit later in the show. But I think for when the time starts to kick in for that fig tree generation is probably likely when Israel took Jerusalem in 1967, because they need to be in control of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem seems to be pretty much at the center or the epicenter of most all end time prophecies. So they needed to have control of that. But the thing is, we don't know how long a generation is. And I remember doing a show with you several years ago on the fig tree generation. And if people haven't heard that, I think they should probably go look it up. It's a very, very good show. But the thing is, we don't know how long a generation is. Is it 7 years as in the Psalms, or is it 120 years? Or 80 years by strength, or 120 years as set down in Genesis 6:3, right? So we don't know, and we don't know whether or not it has to take the full length of any of those periods either. So, but things can happen very, very quickly. But I think it's on the horizon, and I think things are moving at an ever increasing pace, which makes sense
Yes.
if people factor in the birth pangs that should be
Right.
coming with stronger pains as we get closer, and those are wars and rumors of war, and earthquakes, and
Yes.
famines, and
Pestilences,
pestilence,
yes.
pandemics, and
Right.
COVID is, kind of we've had some
It's right
pandemics
there.
before, but not like this in the last 100 years, right? So I
Right.
think this is the beginning of those types of pandemics, and it's these cataclysms in the birth pangs that are going to move things along at a pace you can't really get your head around, how fast things can change through catastrophes. So I think that's what's probably going on.
Peace comes sudden destruction. One also, before, you had hinted at thinking or deliberating upon a third book. Can you give us just an idea, or maybe a topic, or just a hint?
Yeah, it would be a sequel, I think, to the Gen 6 book, because there's so much information I didn't put into the book, and
Right.
I continue to put out commentaries and things like that. And I
Yes.
just think I could tell a lot more of the story that isn't rehashing the same stuff and being, for a lot of people, probably new information. So that's kind of what I've got in my mind for the next book. I might, depending on how fast I can do the books, and I haven't proven successful in doing it quickly. There's a Rapture book. There's a Rapture book I'd like to do as well. But I've got probably like 15 books on my list. But I'm trying to imagine which ones I want to do. So, but I want to get this project done first, and I'm really working hard now to allocate time to spend on it. And I do need a lot of time to pull all the information together and have it make some sense. So,
Right. Possibly connection to, what's happening now, as far as the modern age, with all the unfolding and the push, because it seems to be, now on the horizon more so than ever before, and certainly people are recognizing that.
Oh, absolutely. And so, yeah, certainly on the second Exodus book, it's going to look at a lot of things in relationship to that. And when we look at, from a outside the book perspective, if we look at what's happening on the news today, and I know people have said this for years, that it's shouting the end time coming. Well, it's more than a shout right now. It is, it is making so much of a noise that it's drowning everything else out. Having said that, there's still pushback, right? It's still not working as fast as what as they would like, and I think that's because the restrainer is still here, and I think we all have to always understand that the end time can't come until the restrainer is removed. So that is that is the key.
Yes, and I think that could come. Well, I definitely think that that's going to be part of the, the wrath of God poured out on the wicked and those not written into the books of life. That certainly the restrainer will be removed at that time. But
yes,
in slow degrees leading up to that as well. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, and we know, and I like your timing on that in terms of the restrainer being removed, that it seems to happen probably somewhere around the midpoint or shortly thereafter, in terms of the timing that you set down there, that all the names of the people whose names aren't written in the book. Having said that, the ones who don't worship Antichrist and Satan, as I know you know, they have another resurrection that's coming and the reward for the millennium to rule with Jesus. But we do know that, if you look at Mark and Luke, as it talks about wisdom and it talks about the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit, depending on which translation you're using, they're there during this tribulation of the saints that's recorded in Revelation 7. That so if people who are on the side that it is the Holy Spirit that is the restrainer, then they have to you would have to view Jesus' chronology of events as sort of topical as opposed to a linear event, which of course doesn't make any sense because of the word says and then and then and then, and you've got the abomination in the middle to give you the marker and a reference to Daniel. So that does, for me, I understand that the topical perspective, but it doesn't really sort of match up to what's written there. So you have the restrainer still seemingly there, and then you also have Michael, if you're a fan of Michael being the restrainer. And of course, Michael fights against Persia and Greece in the book of Daniel and the beast empires. He doesn't stop the beast empires from coming, but he fights against them. So he won't stop the 10 king empire from coming in the end time. But what he does do is he prevents Antichrist from taking power and achieving the end time before the time of the Gentiles and the time of Israel has been fulfilled. And the time, as I like to say, and I really love that you mentioned the book of life, until the time of all the names that aren't to be erased from the book of life have a chance to choose God. Right. And again, I know that there's a few extra chapters in there because using the book allegory, because you've got the people in the millennium too, that their names, but they still have to have that chance from that part of prophecy to choose God and choose Jesus, and to ensure that their names aren't erased from or blotted out from the book of life. But some people won't accept them, and you're going to have another war led by Satan when he gets released out of the abyss after 1,000 years with Gog and Magog again to march on Jerusalem. So not everybody in the millennium gets saved either. So we're all here,
which
all
is just
the same
crazy
places.
to me.
Yeah,
it's just crazy to me that he can lead a deception and have some turn their back on the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit again. It's
which
just
is how
so bizarre.
powerful the fallen ones are. I mean, people have been saying for 2 millennia now, how is it that Jesus could say that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible? And they are deceived in the end time when you have all of this information. That's how big the deceptions, and that's how powerful the enemy is. And then after going through the end time, you're right. Like, how could the people 1,000 years later be that deceived? It's extraordinary, and I'm not sure what the events will be because we're not told. That sort of brings about that deception at the end of the 1,000 years, but it's frightening to think about.
Right, absolutely. Because here we have God, Jesus, Yahushua, reigning with us, leading all the nations, and if they don't honor the feast days as God has mandated and laid them out, then they're excluded from that covenant. And it's just so bizarre to me that anybody could be deceived and led astray. But it reminds me that those that are of his bloodline, if it will be in similarity during that period of time as well, will he also have another bloodline, seed line here? Because they, even against all common sense, pledge allegiance and take blood oath to serving him. And so I could see how they would turn their backs even against God and eternity and salvation to just follow their father, the devil.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I mean, you would think it would take a bloodline that would sustain that sort of evil throughout those generations.
Right.
What we do know is that people will survive into the millennium. Not everybody is
Yes.
killed. And
Mhm.
one presumes, with the little information we have, that perhaps, or deduces would be a better word to use, that there will be descendants of Gog and Magog, of that alliance, of those peoples, that will survive and accept Jesus, obviously, as their Redeemer, and God as their God, and the Holy Spirit to be permitted to live into the millennium. But their descendants and their offspring obviously will feel over time, or be misled over time, that they got a raw deal.
Right. Right.
And over
Yeah.
time that grows and grows and grows. And so you would have some of those bloodlines, but I would never rule out, as just as what you're suggesting, because we can't rule out what we're not told, is that there wouldn't be some other kind of bloodline that works there that we just haven't
Right.
been told about in the next set of prophecy. But one would
Yes.
also presume that the people who live in the millennium will receive additional prophecy as to what's going to happen.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it would be interesting to see, as we, conclude this generation and this particular world age, if the prophets are given insight into that particular time, because certainly the millennial reign is one of interest. The topic is one of great interest, and yet it does remain ambiguous with regard to all the details of that particular time, even though we are familiar with it as concept, but just not the timeline and how it all plays out.
Yeah, where we have very, very few details on it. But we do know
Yeah.
what will happen. And the big thing
Yes.
is what has to happen first is really the significant set of events. And that's almost like the I'll get the word out yet, the denouement process, that this is kind of the climax. But because things are done through free choice, for us to have to choose God, just as the
Right.
immortal angels have to choose God, and obviously some didn't, you have this thing playing out now with the rule of the Word of God amongst us, and all the good things that happen in the world in stark example as to what happened in the past. But to shut the door on free choice, then, just as the angels would have had intimate knowledge of God and yet still rebelled, this is one crack in sort of the legal defense, saying, well, you didn't let all scenarios play out. 1,000 years lets that last scenario play out and free choice play out, and let those free choices convict everybody, and then every possible option has been covered off in terms of not following the way of God leads to destruction and war and horrific things.
Yes, chaos and disorder and disintegration, diminution, all of that. Yes, I agree. But let me turn it back over to you. I want to give you a chance to follow up and continue with the Mount Hermon concept and to lead it into where it was you wanted to take the show.
Yeah, and I'm going to be moving forward into a whole new area on it fairly quickly. I just have a couple more details I'd like to throw out for the audience to ponder. Is that I was talking about the Ugaritic texts, and there's a word that is used in KLU 1.13 in a fertility incantation for Baal to create new demigods because of infertility and issues like that. And again, I wonder whether or not this is getting to be the point, because Baal is now in the abyss as a post-Diluvian god who is seemingly in charge, at least from the Canaanite perspective and the biblical perspective. But in that incantation of the fertility ritual, is we get introduced to this word, and this is with the goddess Anat, HRM, because they didn't have vowels between the words. And that's the root word for Hermon. And that's the first time it's seen in the Semitic languages. And so we know it's post-Diluvian because it's Semitic, and it's the first time we get the root word for Mount Hermon, which kind of means in the root sense taboo, forbidden, impure, also consecrated and dedicated. Again, going to that oath that is sworn there by the fallen angels. But it's also the root word for accursed and cursed, as in harem, CHARAM, and basically leads you into an extended set of words that produces the curse and the oath that comes out of Mount Hermon. So you've got that initiation, you've got the rituals, you've got the word Hermon, you've got the root for it, and then what's very interesting is that Hermon isn't the only name that is used for Mount Hermon in the Bible, which is very odd. A couple I get, you get Shinir and Sirion that are used for Mount Hermon that other peoples like the Amorites, you know, call Mount Hermon Shinir, for example. But there's another one in Deuteronomy 4:48. And it is calling Mount Hermon Sion, S-I-O-N. Now, this is not the Hebrew word Zion, which is number 6726. This is a completely different word, and we're not told why it's called Sion. And one of the things that's important to understand on this is there is a maligned secret society called the Priory of Sion, which is thought to be the inner group of the founders of the Knight Templars, who are the patriarchal source organization of all secret societies today, and were the adepts and the princes and the kings of Europe at that time. And there's, by the way, I do have, if people want it, I have a document that shows several documentations of this order in this time frame and throughout the centuries thereafter. So this organization actually existed, but it's important to know because it's important within the secret societies. And this Mount Sion has some interesting sort of connotations to it in terms, of its meaning. So Sion means, and this is the Hebrew word. I'm trying to remember the number. The number slips me at this point, but it basically means lofty in the peak summit of Mount Hermon, and that's 7865. And it derives from SIE 7863, which means excellent, elevation, loftiness, allegorical for pride. And what's really interesting about that is that's what the angels were, is they were lofty, they were proud, they were the Shemayim, the heavenly ones. I am being the plural of Shema for heavens, I am is the plural, and used in the sense of the angels of heaven. These are the lofty ones, the Shemayim. That is also the root word for renown, as the men of renown in Genesis 6:4, which comes from Shem and Shemayim, Shem rooting out of Shema and Shemayim. And the Nephilim were of the lofty ones, just as they were famous. So that's why it's got two meanings to the word that you get the understanding coming out of it in Genesis 6:4. But it's this word of Sion that is important. And there was a title that was crowned within this organizational structure and bloodlines of the kings that go back to the Nephilim. It's the King of Jerusalem title. And the King of Jerusalem title, in their belief system, in their history, they rely on the Bible for this, but it is their inheritance right. And in the time of Joshua, Jerusalem is awarded to the tribe of Benjamin. So within their scion of bloodline, scion is engrafting in other noble bloodlines, and they like to get all of them signed in because it sort of creates that level of hierarchy within the cult of the bloodlines of the royals. You have the Benjamite bloodlines scioned into these bloodlines. And so the three major ones for the bloodlines of the Templars that I'm talking about are de Paon, de Bouillon, and Anjou. And the Anjou of Lorraine, which is where also de Bouillon and de Paon royal realms were as well, and families and control. And in 1118, they crowned Baldwin II, who is the third leader of this organization at the center, the King of Jerusalem. And that's crowned at the Abbey de Notre Dame de Sion.
We'll be right back, everybody, for a second hour. We'll pick it up on the other side.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for a second hour. I'm your host, Sam Garcia. This is Secrets Unveiled here on Truth Frequency Radio, and I'm honored to have as guest with me this evening author Gary Wayne. Gary, I'm turning it back over to you. You were mentioning the Notre Dame Priory or something of that nature.
Yeah, so we were talking about the King of Jerusalem title that these royal bloodlines believe that they inherited from the Benjamite tribe, and they also believe they have the bloodlines of King Saul grafted, scioned into them, that Joshua awarded the Benjamites Jerusalem. And so Baldwin II is crowned the King of Jerusalem title in 1118. And what's interesting about understanding that is that this title continued as part of a set of bloodlines. It splits into 2 or 3 different rivals over time of the Anjou for this King of Jerusalem title. But the linear start that has controlled the actual title as opposed to the rivals goes through the Lorraine region that marries into the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty. So the Anjou, de Bouillon, and de Péan bloodline that have this King of Jerusalem title goes over to the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty. And then the Bourbon family has inherited that through intermarriage and how that title moves forward in terms of who they believe should hold it. And so King Philippe of Spain holds the King of Jerusalem title today, and he inherited it from his father, Juan Carlos. This is the title that they want to crown their Messiah, what we would call Antichrist, with the King of Jerusalem title in the temple in Jerusalem once he takes power. And so when we understand that these bloodlines are important to understand as we look at end time prophecy and the seed of these bloodlines, it's very, very important. Understand that term royal, that they like to call them, Roy Al. A-L would be an alliteration of E-L for angel or a god, just as I-L and several other transliterations. But Roy would come from king, R-O-I, and it comes from Latin for reg for king, French rof, and roy for king as well, and rex out of Latin is a derivative for the French words and rule. Words like realm, regent, viceroy, rich, regulate, rule, and Reich, as in the Third Reich, all extend out of that word for the bloodlines of the royals, the kings of God, right? That's what they're calling themselves. Another name for them would be Rex Deus or Rex Deus. And I want to read a passage out of the Psalms that just sort of fits in with this. And then I'm going to move into some unicorn information in terms of Mount Hermon, if I've got time to do that. But I wanted to get this one in. So Psalms 21, 8 through 13. I won't read all of it, but I'll read a couple, 3 verses that'll sort of make the point. So starting in 21:9, it says, "Thou shalt make them as fiery oven in the time of thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath and the fire, and shall devour them. So we're talking about the end time here. Verse 10, their fruit shalt thou destroy from the earth, and their seed from among the children of men. For they intended evil against thee, they imagined a mischievous device, and which they are not able to perform. So they're going to try and rebel, and they're not. But that seed is going to be destroyed from the face of from the earth. And I'm thinking that's the sort of the royal bloodlines of that seed. But we'll see. We'll have to wait and see how far that goes. And that all makes sense with Daniel 2:43 from the King James Version Bible, where you have the metallic empires and the fourth empire or the fifth empire of that extension for the end time has 10 toes, and those toes are 10 kings, and it clearly says that the seed of those beast empires, understand these empires are the royals. They are the beast empires for a reason, as they're described in Daniel 7, because that's the same beast empire that produces the end time empire and the Antichrist beast empire, which is the eighth. But it says in Daniel 2:43 that they shall mix their seed with the seed of humankind, to paraphrase it. And so you have this bloodline. Whichever mix of that serpentine bloodline you want to figure into that, this bloodline that comes from the fallen angels, that's the seed, that's the fruit and seed that Psalms 21 is talking about. So it's important to understand this, that this isn't just theory. This is backed up by the Bible. It's backed up by what the spurious forces are trying to do. And that's where this whole ideology of the Stuart kings come in, who are the ones who made the King James Version possible by King James of England when he took over the throne. But it's got in his coat of arms the unicorn, and he's the unicorn dynasty. And understand, he's part of this royal bloodline, complete with the Nephilim and Rephaim as divine representatives of the polytheist gods and the council of gods that is talked about in Psalms 82 of the 70 nations and Deuteronomy 28. They have their divine right to rule for those gods on this earth. That's what they believe, and that's why King James wrote an apologetic book called Demonology that is absolutely bizarre, but that's another rabbit hole I won't go down right now. But he had the unicorn, or it was put in for him, this word for a wild bull, which is the Hebrew word rem, not this unicorn that people have this imagery of today, that is this playful little horse. In reality, in polytheism, it's this giant horse with this big single horn that could gore an elephant with that horn and slay it with one gore. It was the horse that the Nephilim kings rode into battle. It was the ideal animal for battle, with several different colors, but mainly white on the body. So that's the imagery. And the reason why it doesn't show up on the ark, this is just a little extra, I'll just throw it in there, it's because I don't believe it's a naturally created being, as in an animal. I think it's some sort of chimera, as it's described. I won't go into the details, but that's why it's not called to the ark. So when you see imageries around about the ark, and you got these playful little unicorns, and they missed the ark. They didn't miss the ark. They didn't get called because they were part of the corruption of the earth and the manipulation of DNA in the plant genome that corrupted the whole earth, which we're just now catching up to on the technology. So when we talk about unicorn,
hybrid species,
it was a hybrid species created for the Nephilim kings and the Nephilim warriors. So unicorn is actually used in conjunction in the Bible with Mount Hermon. And by now people shouldn't be surprised with that. So you have that in if I've got my memory right here, Deuteronomy 3:9 and Psalms 29:6. And it's linked with Sirion and Shinir. So they're linking unicorn in sort of a opaque way, so you're not directly linking it to Hermon. But as we talked about earlier, Sirion and Shinir are two other names for what Mount Hermon is called, and that's what we're told in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, what's interesting about that, and when you start linking it in with these bloodlines, the King of Jerusalem title, which again the Stuart families didn't have the rights to, but so they're a rival to Antichrist as being the one that wins out in the family dynasty that they would put on that 1,000-year reign that they would like to bring about, in, that we now know as the New Age, or Hitler called the Third Reich. So this would be like a Fourth Reich, again, one of their words. We get this single horn, this little horn Antichrist figure in Daniel 7 and Daniel 8. And this is the unicorn imagery that it lines up with. So anywhere you see unicorn in the Bible, and it's only used something like 9 times, it is to further the bloodline imagery and allegory for becoming the ruler, the Messiah, as they would call him, but Antichrist, as we would call him, for the end time. And this Antichrist is the little horn that grows up. So it's a unicorn. And in occult understanding, the unicorn is an allegory for the third eye. It's like an antenna to bring that information down from the fallen angels and make that connection interdimensionally. But it's also the meaning of the word horn that's used in Daniel 7, 8, and 8, 9. And that's the Hebrew word Qeren, Qeren, which means a musical instrument as a horn that's like on an animal, and also a peak of a mountain. And that's why it's used in reference with Mount Hermon. And that's the meaning and the allegory that they're trying to overlay. And this is the Antichrist figures, and I don't know who the bloodline will be to produce Antichrist. There's several rivals, as I mentioned, but this will be a bloodline of the serpent angels, of rebellious angels who created Nephilim and Rephaim, that is going to, if they get their way, claim the King of Jerusalem title at the abomination. And what's interesting about that term Sion, and when we talk about Og and Sihon of that Mount Hermon area, and understand that Og was the last of the Rephaim and Sihon was killed just before him. Og was probably the most powerful of the Bashan area, ruling over 60 cities. And they used to group in what I call pentapolis alliances of 5 city-states, just like the Midianites. There's 5 kings, there's 5 Philistine kings, and all of those Rephaim-led nations of that time formed in pentapolises. He had 12 pentapolises that he reigned over, from at Ashtaroth and Edrei as his 2 places of running and living. And these were all mighty walls that they lived in, because they were giants. And so it's what's interesting is about Sihon, who Og goes in to fight afterwards, after Sihon is killed. And so they're part of an alliance there. And it's this name Sihon that I'm going to focus on fairly quickly here, but just make some very odd sort of connections for some people. So in the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, and granted, it has a number of issues with it. It has some interesting connections that I think we need to sort of look at, is that it will describe King Sion as Sion in Joshua 13:21. And it would also, and that's spelled Sion, is also referred to in Joshua 13:21 as Sion with Seon. So he's in the kingdom of the Amorites as Seon. And with the spoils of Sion is Sion, where it's the duke's dwelling in the country in the King James Version. So you get Sion and Sion being sort of interchangeable with this mountain called Sion in Deuteronomy 4:48. Now, in Deuteronomy 4:48 in the Septuagint, it uses Seon for the spelling of Mount Sion, which is the same spelling for Sion. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then in Joshua 13:19, they use the spelling of Sion in Mount Enad for Mount Hermon. And then the Septuagint in 1926 uses Sion, Sion, and Labanath, whereas the King James Version has it as Shihor and Libanath. So it's again different than the King James Version. And then you've got in 1326, you've got King Sihon spelled as Sean of Heshbon. And then in 1321, you've got the inhabitants of Sion, Sion. So you go back and forth between the spellings of what Sihon is, Sion is, and they're interchangeable seemingly in, I don't know why they use so many different spellings of it in the Septuagint, but there's an interconnection there. And if there's an interconnection there as that Greek is translated into English in the same language that is used in the Bible, which isn't the same Sion for Zion, two different words as we talked about earlier, there's a connection there that they're overlaying on it. What's interesting about, as you take that word back in its etymology, you don't really get a meaning for it unless you go back to the word Sior, which is different than the Sior, which is, I won't go into it at this point in time, but Sior, which is also used for Mount Hermon, goes back to a Venetian word and comes out of Latin. And it means master and lord, and it's rooted in the word for senior, which goes back to that meaning for Baal. So there is a strong connection here in terms of how they use double entendres and different kind of variations of the meanings to use throughout their organization and the allegories within their bloodlines. Remember at the beginning of the show, I talked about all of this taciturn language that only the adepts understand. This is what I'm talking about. And so we have to understand that they hide it in plain sight, was what we talked about. And with all of this importance on those words, they are going to essentially conflate Mount Zion in Jerusalem with Mount Hermon as Sion. And they're also going to take over Jerusalem. And I think they're just going to place their organizational structure and their government and their religious center in Jerusalem in the end time. And that's why it's going to be called figuratively Sodom in the end time. And that's at the time when Antichrist has destroyed Babylon and has relocated his religious center into Jerusalem for the last 3.5 years. So watch for however this comes about, I guess, is the whole point in terms of what's going on at Mount Hermon, what the globalists and their belief systems are going to be doing with Mount Hermon, which is, you know, where the rock of the gods are and the gateway to Hades are, which is an allegory to the underworld, to the abyss, and how that plays out in the end time, and then the taking over of Jerusalem by Antichrist at the 3.5 year point of the last 7 years.
Wow. that's quite a treatise, and putting it all to, connection with Antichrist and how all that ties in with the opening passage for this particular show. That's quite profound.
That was quite a choice you made to open up. I was sitting there going,
Yeah.
Zen must have read my mind.
Yeah, I was thinking so. Well, I just wanted to, and I guess it was just perfect. God led me to it, and it summarizes and connects with all of what you are revealing. But please continue in whichever way you would like to.
Well, that's
Knowing
kind of
we
what
have just.
that's
Okay.
kind of what I wanted to talk about in terms of just sort of getting that out there for people. And I do have it in a 5-part document form for people if they do want to get that, has that and a whole bunch more. But I didn't want to get too far into the minutia on that on air tonight. But this is the government structure on Earth that is reporting to the Council of the Gods and doing their will, right? And I always like to make an allegory for people that on Earth you have something that's set up in sort of the dualist religion of polytheist, where you've got good versus evil, but no one ever really wins. It just sort of continues. So it's like a chess game that ends, and then there's another chess game. And you've got black and white, which just says you've got, black magic and white magic and good witches and bad witches. It's all part of the dualism, not only with the male, female, but on the chessboard, those are the pieces of what's done on earth as it is done in heaven. And so the king and the queen are the royals, and they're the divine representatives on the earth of both government and religion. And then you have the bishops, who are the priests that are operating. And then you have the knights, which are the mighties, which are, the archangels, which are the fighters. And the knights are always in, as we understand it, in more common language out of the Middle Ages, they are always part of the noble elite. Poor people were never knights. They just weren't the royal sons, like they're the first sons. These were still noble elite, and they were able to have the fine stallions and be able to afford that and keep them, plus all the weapons, right? So the mundane humans, they had to walk. And the rooks, these are those mighty walls. These are those fortresses, right, that they fight of. And you also have some connections in there to the angels, but I won't make it's too long and drawn out. And of course, the pawns are the fodder. They're the humans that go out and are sacrificed, right? And you've got the black and the white, the good Nephilim, the bad Nephilim. They're at war against each other, but they still worship the same pantheon of gods. And then that checker board is the same checkerboard floor that you'll see in colors that are in a lot of royal courts and in Masonic halls before their altar. The allegory is just absolutely amazing. And of course, they created such a great game out of it and everything. But again, it's just hiding how things are done on earth as they're done in heaven. And think about it as sort of going up into different sort of pillars up to the council of the gods. So it's the watchers, the seraphim angels, who are running the government and the kings, which is why you've got the seraphim, serpentine angels, and all of the imagery for the kings in serpent and dragons and their gods the same way, because the Nephilim look just like them in that bloodline from the angels, and several of them, because there was at least 200, as we're told about in the book of Enoch. So you've got that coming down from the seraphims, who are overseeing the religious aspect and the government aspect on earth. And again, that's why in the religions, even within the Roman Church, all the people running the church were of the black nobility. They were part of the bloodlines. It wasn't poor people that were running the church. They're part of the elite. People need to understand that. And the archangels are the ones who looked after the army side of it, just as host of heaven is, take that back. It's a large body, but it's also in rank and like an army. And there's fighters, and there's, every angel has a role, and the archangels are leading that in terms of the fight between the angels, when, led by Satan's forces and one led by God's forces, in terms of being at the top as to running it like a general. So you have to look at it that those ranks that they have in the military all go back to the same sort of etymological sources that, identify who they are. But you've got those three pillars that are running things. And in terms of the organizational structure, Satan's going to have his own throne that's going to be like God's, that oversees the earth. So he's going to have cherubim and Ophanim that are part of the whole throne room that Enoch talks about, because he's going to counterfeit everything. So when you start to project that down into the 70 nations, there's probably several of those throne rooms, that let's say the top 7 have. And then after that, the tens of them that come out of that, in terms of the nations, they would have a set of gods, all going up in that hierarchy. And then as that transitions down to the earth, that's where the demigods came into play, the ones that they produced as their divine representatives, which is why they ran things and still run things today. It's essentially the same structure that's in place today.
Mm-hmm. Be right back for final segment, everyone.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased, as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Many truth seekers are constantly studying alone. But there is a place where we can come together. The Digital Readers Club is our online ecclesia meant for those who've forsaken churchianity, but still want the closeness of a family to study with. Join us every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to put together the puzzle pieces of truth scattered throughout the ancient scriptures.
Wherefore, Abraham, hast thou looked upon the iniquities of Sodom and her sister cities? For they have provoked the Lord with their abominations. For 4 times in each year they gather together to sing and dance before their idol gods. And when they are dancing, every man layeth hold upon the wives and daughters of his neighbors, and lieth with them, and this they do without authority from God, which thing is an abomination in his sight. But behold, this is the least of their sins. For no man is safe who entereth their city. For when a stranger entereth there, they will take from him his goods by force, and they will abuse his body. For both men and women will they bind, and crowds of the Sodomites will gather about them and lie with them by force, until everyone who desireth to lie with them hath done so. Now it is a wicked thing that men and women should be forced to lie with another against their will. But here the whole city uniteth to force this wicked thing. Moreover, when they have stolen a man's goods and abused his flesh, they will torture him. And when they tire of torturing him, they will leave him naked and without food or water to die in the streets of their city. And it is forbidden by the law for anyone to help such an one by giving him food or drink. Moreover, the people of these cities have numerous idol gods before which they practice every kind of abomination without authority. Wherefore the Lord hath sent us to gather the righteous out of the cities before they are destroyed. These cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and two others, there were 5 cities, but one was spared. These are the cities that lied in the plain of Shinar and that were ruled over by the giants and the fallen angels. And they practice all this abomination and they normalize this abomination. And it seems to me that this is exactly what is being pushed on the world. The Alice Bailey and the 10-point plan to bring in the New World Order and how they want to destroy the family and Christian values and normalize abominations such as pedophilia and the bisexuality and homosexuality and transgender and all of these things we see are in the forefront. And even, where it's made illegal to feed the homeless when you have so much food that is daily thrown away in this nation. It's a repeat, seemingly a circle and a repeat of what had already been done, and these cities having already been destroyed as an example in that day and age. Gary?
Yeah, it's something that people really need to think about as to what they actually do with the imagery and the words that they're talking about today. They are trying to bring about Sodom and Gomorrah because those are very important cities in their religion. And most people don't think that the politicians that are supporting this are religious. They're just not telling you that they're polytheists. So Sodom and Gomorrah were known as cities of light, cities on a hill, a shining hill, and all important cities were built sort of on a hill, as sort of the mythos goes. And there's even a few verses in the Bible on it. So they were cities of light, cities of knowledge, cities of being declared free of the laws of God. And I think everybody's aware of most of the sins that would have taken place and all of the debaucheries in Sodom and Gomorrah. But most people don't really connect that really back to they were doing the ways of the Nephilim and the ways of the Rephaim, with the Rephaim were the ones who were ruling over them. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at what Ham did right after the flood, while they were still on Mount Ararat, which is Arar for curse and the mountain of the curse, that Canaan is actually cursed, not Ham, for essentially raping his father, as you take that language back to Leviticus 18 and 20. In terms of the language, it's not just being naked and uncovered. It means a sexual sin, and in this case, an abomination, as in the homosexual aspect of it. And in the ways of the Canaanites. And Canaan is actually, he wasn't even born then. This is kind of a prophecy of the denunciation, that this is what is going to happen to the youngest son of Ham and their descendants, and that they're going to be servants of servants. And so Canaan goes back into that word of servitude as you take that back to Hebrew. So as it surfaces up, these are the laws that God writes, that you're not to do the ways of the Canaanites who have interbred with the Rephaim. And we know they interbred with the Rephaim because only Canaan, Heth, and Sidon are named as patriarchs. In all the tables of the nations listed have a male patriarch that is accounted for. But then you get these families of the Canaanites that don't have a patriarch. And I think that is indicating that families, as you take that back to Hebrew again, it means not just family, but a different kind, different species. And these are hybrid humans that are being reproduced. And so the Canaanites were intermixed with that species. So that's part of the sexual things that God is saying to the Israelites that you shouldn't take part in, but also it's going to talk about lying with a man. And again, that is thought to be a typical debauchery of the Rephaim and the Nephilim before that, before the flood. And what's interesting is you get talk about that in legend, but you don't get a whole lot that you can sort of put your hands around. And we certainly don't get in scripture that it says the Nephilim slept with other Nephilim, male Nephilim. But you get hints of that level of debauchery in First Enoch, and also in Enoch, Book of Giants, where they're doing all of these horrible things to humans, female and male, and sinning against them. But there is another out there book, and it's called the Manichaean book. It's from the Manichaean sort of extension of the Book of Giants. And it's from the book of Lamech of Cain. And in chapter 8, it actually uses the language that Jude 1:7-8 uses in terms of strange flesh. So it says something like, that the men continually sought after strange flesh for gratification. And this is talking about the Nephilim in that book, the book of the Lamech of Cain. And then it uses the same language as is used in Leviticus in terms of describing the sexuality of uncovering the nakedness of their fathers and of their mothers. They did that as well. And so that's, again, if you look at the laws, so many of the laws that are provided for Israel, it's to be separated from the rest of the world that are ruled over and the doings of these Rephaim and the descendants of the Rephaim. And that includes all of those sexual laws, as well as things like even as far as it applies for the Christians, when the Gentiles didn't have to follow all of the laws of the Torah based on the new covenant and who they are, because they're not separated as priests as God. They're going to be united. That all gets resolved into the future, in the future time. But the laws that the Gentiles only had to follow were don't drink blood, which is a Nephilim debauchery, not to eat food sacrificed to idols, Rephaim, Nephilim debauchery, and don't eat strangled animals, which they tended to do in a lot of cases at a lot of these rituals. So a lot of the laws that are written are specifically attributed to what the Rephaim and the Nephilim did. And I was so glad when you read that you connected the Rephaim as being with those people of the cities of the plain and of Sodom and of Gomorrah. That it all sort of comes together. So the Bible just is so perfect in how it is consistent, but sometimes you have to do a lot of work to put things together.
Right. And, you know, the story of even when Israel, after the Exodus, they're led into Canaan, and then Joshua and Caleb and the others, they're told to slaughter every man, woman, and child. And, you know, so many people that don't understand the origins of Hermon, or how the fallen angels and the giants, the interactions and their influence upon the people of those cities, and the kind of behaviors that they were, you know, practicing, and the kind of religion that was taught to them, that this is the reason. Not only were they hybrid and, you know, wicked to the core, but they were also efficient in magic, that they were taught all kind of sorcery and, you know, necromancy. And so this is the reason why. And yet so many people believe that, oh, how can God, you know, say, because isn't that just callous and unjust to wipe out every man, woman, and child? That's a homicidal, a maniacal type of creator. I can't follow a God like that. My God is loving and just and compassionate, and would never hate or, you know, condemn or judge. And yet they don't understand the context of the story and the reasons for, because, you know, the slaughter and the abomination is much like the flood, in that he was providing us a space, an environment where humanity would be safe to repopulate and to grow and to, you know, come up in safety. Otherwise, the giants, they being cannibals as well, that they ate the flesh, consumed humanity, and drank the blood of humanity, which is abomination, and thus why we see the prohibition with the covenant of Noah.
Yeah, they just didn't squat in the land of the covenant that was separated by God for his intentions. They laid there in ambush, waiting through the generations to slaughter Israel from the face of the earth so the Messiah couldn't be presented. These just weren't average people. These were the Rephaim and the Rephaim hybrids that were offspring of them, and they defiled the land in all the ways of the law that Israel was told not to do and given in their law. And we get more than just those 10 families to understand who these people are. In Numbers 13:33, you get the two portions, say three portions of the report. You've got a description of the land, you get the Loyal Scouts report, and then you get the exaggerated aspect of the report in Numbers 13:33. That scares the Israelites for not entering in. But the accurate part of the details have the Anak or Anakim, and led by Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai as Anakim examples. And these are giants. And I'll come back to that in a second. And you have Canaanites, and you have Amalekites, and you have Amorites, and several other names that are listed. These are people taller than the Israelites, and they all dwelled within these mighty walls, these mighty fortresses that I was talking about earlier in the show. It was talking about two different people. Now, in the evil part of the report, you have the scouts who are so afraid of these monsters that they saw and the power that they had, that they elevated them to the word giant. In this case, goes back to the word Nephilim. And Nephilim's only, or giant only goes back to Nephilim in 3 times in the Bible. Once in Genesis 6:4, twice in Numbers 13:33, where it's talking about the Anakim, where these are the children of the Anakim and they're giants. But the Anakim weren't Nephilim. And we know that because in Deuteronomy 2, where they're described as giants, that goes back to the word Rapha and the I am male plural. But what the scouts who were afraid and were trying to intimidate the Israelites were trying to do is they were trying to elevate the Rephaim to even more scarier people, which were the Nephilim before the flood, because they were thought to be bigger, more powerful, and distinct some way, somehow, than the Rephaim after the flood. And this goes to the veracity of what the Israelites understood about those antediluvian giants as being real and how much more scarier than these monsters were. And all of those details of what the Loyal Scouts reported is actually underscored by Moses 40 years later in Deuteronomy 1, before they start to head out to start to take the covenant land. And so again, you're talking about Amorites, you're talking about a people taller than the Israelites, and then they were talking about the Anakim as well, who were the Rephaim giants. So you have the hybrids and the giants all located, and the spies went through all out the covenant land and listed the areas that those hybrids and Rephaim kings ruled from, and also understanding that they were also across the Jordan River and into the Mount Hermon area with Sihon and Og in that alliance, and also the Midianites were also aligned with them. And then you had the southern giants as well, but I'm going down too far of a rabbit hole here. So I just wanted to sort of throw some examples out when you were talking about that these people were monsters, they were evil, they were powerful, and they defied all of the land, just as they were corrupting the land before the flood. They were doing the same things as the Nephilim were. So when Israel came in, they were only doing to the Rephaim and the hybrids what they had vowed to do to Israel, and they were trying to eliminate them to purify the land. But unfortunately, they didn't finish the job, and it came back to haunt them throughout the years of Israel in the southern kingdom.
Yes, and they were warned to not allow the leaven to corrupt them, and yet they did not answer, and that ended up coming back upon them. But yeah, I think it's very important to make this point understandable, because it says that Og he ruled over 60 cities, and that these cities were high walled and protected, highly protected, and that the people, these were warriors. These were people that, the giants that ruled over all of these people, they lived in fear. And according to the book that we had did the show on the Lost Book of King Og of Bashan, that they ate the children of what they called the little people, or the lesser people. And so the humans that were living in, kept around them, were very much living in high fear. And so, these were the warriors that were, everybody was fearful of them, scared of them, would never even think of challenging them. And yet here the Most High was leading his people into the land to decimate, to slaughter, and to bring about the destruction of these warrior clans, these giants and these monstrosities that had been ruling and reigning and feared for what was generations, and they had no respect unto the gods and believed themselves to be immortal and also untouchable. And yet God, he showed them, and through their example, that he is the Almighty, the Omniscient, the All-Powerful, and the only, God, the true God.
Yeah, so just so that people understand what we're talking about and understand the antediluvian ones would have been bigger. We don't get a
Right.
size for Og, but what we do get in Deuteronomy 11 is that his bed was made of iron, because wood wouldn't hold his weight by the inference, but it was 9 cubits long by 4 cubits wide. And so a cubit, standard cubit, common cubit would be 18 inches, 21 inches, sometimes a little bit less depending on who you're talking to, would be the royal cubit. This was King Og, so he would be in royal cubits. But either way, that's going to make his bed 6 to 7 feet wide, made of iron, and 13.5 to 16 feet long, which means he's going to be somewhere between 13 to 15 feet tall. And he's... And in Isaiah 25, it talks about the strong ones, which goes back to the Hebrew word as, which is defined as stout. And the reason why that word's important is because they thought to have had a height to width ratio that was 2 to 1 versus the standard average for humans is 3 to 1. So they're 50% broader. And so these were muscular, fast, dexterous warriors. They were fleet of foot, they were powerful, they were strong. And in the 7 mighty nations that are being described in Joshua's time, the mighty doesn't go back to Gibborim, but it actually goes back to another word that gives you even more information about it. And it is 6105 Atzim. And it is rooted in a word that is related to it. That's Atzam, and it means from the ability from the limbs to crush bones. So what it's saying in the meaning is that their hands, they could crush bones, human bones in their hands. That's how powerful they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it also reminds me of the story of Wild Bill. He talked about the stories of the Native Americans that had brought out these the bones of the giants that had lived even here in the Americas before the native peoples settled there. They talked about the giants, running alongside the buffalo and picking one up and ripping off a leg and consuming it all at the same time as they're running alongside and capturing some of these stories. It's pretty wild.
It's astounding. Now picture this.
Yeah, it really is.
So the average Israelite, we're told, would be somewhere around 5'5" to 5'6", and even Goliath. This is, several hundred years after, 400 years after or so, and he's going to be 9 feet 9 inches to 11'1". And again, I think 11'1" tall would be better because he was the king of Gath, in terms of my understanding, and why 5 stones were taken to kill all 5 kings if David had to that day. But what's interesting about that is if you've got people who are under 6 feet tall, looking at, let's say, the hybrids might be closer to Goliath's height, and then the Rephaim closer to Og's height. That's astounding, and they were twice as wide, and also they had the ability in these great cities of manufacturing weapons. So they had iron weapons and swords and shields, and they had the chariots and the horses, and all the Israelites had was a movable camp and no chariots, no horses. They had slings. They probably made some arrows. They probably had some swords, and they went up against nation after nation, army after army, and slew them all.
Yes.
It's astounding.
It really
And
is.
they had to have faith in God to be able to do it, which they didn't have in the beginning. Now, God also sent things like bees to confuse the giants and things like that.
Right.
But my Lord, I can't imagine going out into a field of battle and looking up and seeing the size of those monsters and how fast they could move coming at me. It's mind-boggling.
It really is. And, all we had read in the Lost Book of King Og of all the magic and all of the, even invisibility and things of that nature, that the possession of all the different things that these giants were involved in. Hey, Gary, great show, brother. Good catching up with you.
Yeah, good to be with you again. And I thought it was a really good discussion tonight. Thank you.
We'll do it again soon. Be blessed, brother.
You too.
Good night, all. Shalom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this video and this broadcast. We appreciate all of you, and thank you for your patronage. Please do like and subscribe and share with your friends. God bless all of you in your seeking.